Hi, I'm in Bradford, Pennsylvania, visiting my 95-year-old mother and my sisters for a few days. It's early March, so it is cold. In fact, we're having an ice storm outside, so I'm tucked in for the morning, and that makes my day because, I'll have the whole week to visit with my family, but today I'm going to just have a play with my art materials. Okay, so this is my photo reference. I'm going to keep it on hand here, but I'm not going to work real hard to depict it exactly. I'm going to start with some Inktense pencils and get some shapes, some textures with the Inktense, kind of activating the surface of my paper using a few different colors. And off camera, I'm dipping these Inktense pencils into water because they give a little bit more saturated color that way. They're a lot more intense color than watercolor pencils. I really like these Inktense pencils for sketching. And I'm putting some leaf shapes in just to get some ideas. I will say I'm not going to be working very hard to depict this composition that I have in my photograph because next week you will see me take these two sketches that I do today where I didn't work very hard on composition. I'm just doing textures and marks that to me give an impression of these flowers and this garden scene. I'm not working to compose the composition because next week I'm going to be tearing these two pages up and repositioning pieces of them to create the final composition on a different substrate. So I'm working on sketch paper that's acid-free sketch paper right out of a good sketchbook. I mean, it's a nice sketchbook, so I know that it's giving me true color that's not going to yellow with age or have the paint sink into it like a cheap sketchbook would. So I'm getting gorgeous color right out of my palette. I'm working with my own palette setup. This is Daniel Smith paints for the most part that I've taken from tubes and squirted into these pans. And you can see I have I have scotch taped into my little palette samples of each one of these colors so I know what they look like. And on the back of that palette, I have written the names of the pigments so that I would know when one gets low what to refill it with. So I've been using these paints for a long, long time, and I've been auditioning different colors, just checking these marks and textures, again, my photo reference, so that I can get a variety of textures inspired by that photograph. This is a chip brush from the hardware store. It's about a ½ inch wide, and I have chopped it in half with scissors. So I've cut it short on an angle, and I dip into some of my darks and kind of push it around to give the idea of other garden textures going on behind the flowers. I love building up darks around the lights and around the bright colors. And I'm building some darks, and I'm putting that aside now, and I'll start a second sketch. Again, I'm going to be I tore this obviously right out of my sketchbook. I'm traveling, so I'm not carrying a lot of heavy watercolor boards or heavy papers along. When I'm out and about, I can just use this type of paper or you can use a printer paper. Wouldn't be much lighter weight than this sketch paper. After all, this is not my final painting. This is something that I'm going to be tearing up and repositioning onto a substrate when I get back to my studio. And I will be posting the repositioning of these marks and textures into a composition on next week's video. So stay tuned. I usually work from light to dark, so I'm putting some of the lighter colors in, and then I'm building from there a little bit more saturated color. This sketch on this paper will harmonize nicely when I start to collage, start to tear this up and combine some of these torn pieces with the previous sketch. The reason they're going to harmonize is because I am using the same palette, the same colors, and yet I'm using different brushes on this one. This brush that I'm using, I apologize, my hand is between between the camera and the painting. I apologize. It's not easy to demo when I'm not in my studio, so you'll just have to look at what I've just done, I guess. But I'm using this old elementary school, a public school paintbrush here. It's got a great big mop on the end, and it's kind of floppy and sloppy, and it's a wash brush, and it makes these nice marks that to me look like petals from a flower. So I love this brush. I've got really expensive, nice brushes back home in the studio, but this is one that I take with me because I really enjoy painting with it, and if I lost it along the way, it really wouldn't hurt anything. So I have quite a lot of saturation of color on this sketch as well as the previous one. But where a lot of people would stop about here, this to me is only halfway to where I want to go, because along with putting some lines in to create stems, I also will be adding some darks. I think when things are as light and bright as they are here, that is lovely, but if I want those to really show up, I'm going to add some darks behind the brights and the lights, and that will really pop them off the page. Primarily, I'm using a dark sap green along with sap green and green gold.Ose are the three greens that I'm using. But in order to get really dark, I am going from my dark sap green in my palette to the top left color there. You see I'm going from sap green to that top left color, and that color on the top left is carbazole violet. I love the darks that dark sap green and carbazole violet make. To me, that's a very believable dark color for a garden, I should say. This is a fine liner. I am picking up a fine liner applicator that I have filled with liquid white acrylic paint. Usually I pop some lights in with some Dr. P.H. Martin's bleed proof white, but in this case, on this trip, I didn't bring bleed proof white. I brought my little fine liner applicator. It's got a long needle that I can apply paint through this needle, and gives me just a little bit of a dot in the center of some of these flower shapes. And once that's dry, I'm gonna, okay, so I'm putting the needle, threading that needle in the lid back through that applicator, and that's going to keep that applicator needle from clogging. It'll be available to me weeks or months later without clogging up. So I'm going to be coming back around in a minute or two once the acrylic dots in those flowers are dry, and I'm going to be adding some yellow watercolor on top of those. Just for fun. I really love these flowers that seem to have a little yellow dot in the middle of them. But right now I'm putting some lines in. I really love the idea of how the calligraphy of lines draw your eye through a composition. And when you're working with garden botanicals, the lines from the stems and the lines from the vines really lead your eye around when you're looking right down into a garden. And even though I'll be tearing this up and repositioning a lot of these two sketches, I will be glad next week to have these lines to work with. I just think it adds a lot of personality to the painting. So back when years ago I would have quit drawing on this sketch a long time ago, I have developed this and developed it a lot further than I would have earlier in my watercolor career. So when I'm doing these botanical paintings, I push the color, I push the textures, put in the biggest variety of textures I can figure out how to put. Now I'm going back to my first sketch, which doesn't have any lines, and I decided I wanted some lines into this one. Adding some lines, and then I will be adding some of my darks. This is what's really fun about working on more than one sketch. You learn something from one sketch and you can take that something that you've learned and apply it to another sketch. It's kind of an accumulation of watercolor magic. It's really fun to not think about doing a painting. I'm thinking of doing a variety of paintings, and altogether I will have spent about 20 minutes entirely in doing these two sketches. So I'm dipping into that favorite combination of carbazole violet and dark sap green. I really love those colors working together. And take notice, I'm going to be putting some really dark darks behind some of these flower shapes and watch how it pops them out. It gives the carbazole violet and dark sap green really give a beautiful sort of neutral dark. It's not exactly a gray. I'm not sure what I would call it. A green gray, maybe. And I'm popping in some darker darks. I can't wait to tear these up in next week's video and see where I can go with these compositions. I love collage. And here is my final couple of sketches. So stay tuned next week for the composition, the collage. And thank you for watching. Don't forget to hit subscribe, and if you hit the little bell, you will be reminded each time I post one of these videos. Thanks again. Bye-bye.